Hi guys, welcome back to Deep Space. My name is Ben. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor, and today we are going to be talking about something pretty heavy. I'm glad to do it though because it's something that's really important to my heart. I hope it's important to you too. Hey, really hard week for that this week. Seems like it's getting worse. It seems like we're seeing more of it, and this week we saw a version of it that is really heartbreaking. It's hard to wrap our heads around. There's something what I've been learning about psychology and about humans and about how humans work. There's a way of seeing people that's really helped me to make sense of the worst that we see in the news and we see in our culture, we see among us. To help explain it, we have to kind of zoom out and we have to zoom in to the human experience, to humans. So in zooming out, what we're looking at is we're looking at the trajectory, the development of the human race, like species-wise, the evolution of the human. The human, as we find ourselves today, has come out of a pretty barbaric past, pretty animalistic, just very much focused on survival, on power, on making sure that everybody gets theirs and survives. Those roots that are really based on resource gathering and power and survival really changed on the planet in the last 100 years. We as parents have been able to reasonably expect to have our kids outlive us. As our culture, as our civilization, as the human race progresses, we're safer, we're less dialed into survival, and we're more dialed into this new thing. As we try to make sense of what we're seeing in the worst of us, it's helpful to see where we are in the trajectory of the human race as a species and as we're developing. We've emerged out of a barbaric past and we're moving into something different. As we zoom into that, when we zoom in, we can look at the actual human brain and the human nervous system. You're probably familiar with left brain, right brain split and what that means, creativity on the right and language and structure and decision making on the left. But you might be less familiar with another distinction within the brain of top brain, bottom brain. We used to be super dialed into the subcortical, deeper parts of our brains. The subcortical part of our brain is all about survival. It's the animal in us. Subcortical basement part of our brain is very similar to your dog's brain, to a chimp's brain. It does what your dog's brain does for him. Keeps him safe, keeps him fed. It's where fight or flight lives. That's the subcortical basement of the brain. Top of it, as humans, we have a frontal lobe, right? We're the only animal in the animal kingdom. We're the only species that has it the way that we have it. Apes have a little bit of it, but if you look at an ape skull, it's like sloping and has a sliver of it. We got these big old fat foreheads, some of us fatter than others. Behind it, the frontal lobe of the brain, which is what makes us uniquely human. This part of you, when you're operating from this part of you, is responsible for stuff that your chimp at the zoo or your dog can't do. Stuff like empathy, stuff like identity, being able to have a cohesive sense of self. Who are you and what do you believe in? How do you intend to operate? What do you want to be like? Can you put your mind in the mind of another person? Can you empathize? Can you understand what it must be like to be them? And from that comes all the best of us, typically. It's where our sense of morality comes from, our sense of self, an identity that your dog doesn't think about who he is. The chimp doesn't really think about how the other chimps feel. Not really. They do have a little bit of it, but not the way that we do. So, as survival becomes more and more secondary, as it fades as the primary function of the human nervous system, and the primary goal is we just gotta live through this thing. As we move from that, we're able to move into this new, progressed human mind. It's capable of understanding and capable of seeing things, and the coolest thing about it, capable of managing that chimp within us. I know I'd like to do that. I feel like doing that, but that's not like me. That doesn't fit my values. That doesn't fit who I believe me to be, and not only that, but I can understand how that would feel for the other person. And so I can't my empathy doesn't allow me to terrorize that person because I can imagine what it would be like for them, and I can't imagine putting them through something like that. As a species, we're moving out of this subcortically dominated part of ourselves, and we're moving into this new human who's able to understand, think, and be more. One principle in neuroscience, what you have to understand about brains is something really simple. Whatever fires, wires. What we use, what we utilize, grows. What we don't gets snipped off. It's just found unnecessary. It's wasteful. That part of our brain is not really activated. Is not really developed if we're not really using it. What we grow and what we use is heavily influenced by what we're around and what we experience, especially the brains that we look to for formation, like our parents, like our communities, who we look to say, our brains, we don't choose it. Our brains mimic and mirror the brains around us, and it grows us into who we're going to be. As the human race is no longer so focused on survival, and as we're moving into this new understanding of everybody, this understanding of where we fit as global citizens, when we can understand the worldviews of those around us, and we can accept and we can tolerate ambiguity, and we can move into a more complex understanding of life and of self. Because that's the thing, subcortical and survival is really interested in simplicity. Make it simple. Tell me who's in, tell me who's out. Tell me what's safe, tell me what's dangerous. Tell me what I need to fight, tell me what I need to accept. Frontal lobe is all about contemplation and ambiguity and differences and the complexity of life and the complexity of different experiences and who people are, as what makes people who they are, apart from these simple things. Right now the world is changing. We are progressing as a species. There is less violence on the planet now than there's ever been in the history of the human race. You should check out a book, The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker. We're accepting differences amongst each other. We're creating a more homogenous group that can look and say, your surface level differences are not going to trip up my subcortical brain and make me think that you're my enemy, because I can understand with my prefrontal cortex, with my actual self, I can understand the complexity of your life and who you really are. It's really cool. We're changing in really great ways. Women's rights, right? The civil rights movement. This is reflections, even though those 40, 50, 70 years ago, those are reflections of we're beginning to understand, hey, people have rights. We can understand what makes them uniquely human. We can empathize with it. We can accept it even though it's different. We don't have to fight it like a monkey. We don't have to fight it like a dog that attacks everything that's different just because it doesn't understand it, right? We're changing. But there's holdover. There's still an element of humanity that is immersed in subcortical functioning, and it resists change. Not only does it resist it, but it fires up the nervous system. It fires up the body to fight it. It fights against things that are different. It fights against anything that tries to change because it's unknown, and the subcortical brain hates the unknown. So, in a sense, what we're saying is one of the ways that we can understand hatred and we can understand racism and bigotry in our society and in ourselves is it's coming from the part of ourselves that's the most animal. And what we do to resist it is we become the most human. We develop, we emerge. This is my favorite way to understand this thing, okay? So think of it like this. Dichotomy 1, right? Horizontal differences. They're all over the place. Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, white, black, Christian, Muslim. There's tons of differences, things that we can look at and say, we have different beliefs, we have different skin color, we have different cultural backgrounds, we are different. A lot of the world, especially the subcortical, wants to simplify differences into this dichotomy, the horizontal, right? This is what separates us. This is what we fight. This tells us who to be against and who to be for, who to let in and who to keep out, right? And it simplifies it, and it just the subcortical brain just gets off on that stuff, just loves it. Tell me who to fight, tell me who to hate, and I'll do it. This is not the dichotomy that matters. This is, how do you handle your beliefs? Do you go high? Do you go human, prefrontal cortex, or do you go low? Do you get flared up into violence and hatred? How easy is it to make you fight or flight or freeze? How do you handle the differences that you see around you? This dichotomy matters much more than this one. If you are a white Christian Republican, okay, and you see your enemy as the liberal Democrat over here, and it might not even be about race for you at this point, but let's just say this person, you see this as the dichotomy. How do you handle that? Do you go high with that, where you have an identity that you're based in complex thought and understanding of differences and ambiguity and the human experience, where you're looking at it saying, I can understand where you're coming from, and I handle that peacefully, graciously. I handle that with safety and with love. Or do I handle that by terrorizing my enemies, by attacking those who are different from me? Because here's the deal. This is one of the most important parts. Both hatred and love are contagious. They spread. They spread experientially. When you treat people with love, love is in them. They experience it. It moves them. It grows them. Mimic neurons in their brains. It brings them up. It helps them feel safe. It calms their subcortical. And the opposite is true too. When you attack people, when you terrorize them, you spark their subcortical defenses, their anger, their rage, their aggression, and their fear. If you're like me, you can feel it sparking, some subcortical deep stuff. I don't like what I'm seeing. When I see these reports, when I see these clips of hatred and anger, I can feel it spark in me, and I want to fight it. I get angry. So what is hatred? How do we make sense of all this? How do we tie this all together? Hatred, bigotry, racism, these issues, really what they're about is they're about a difference here more than they're about a difference here. They're about a vertical difference. It's a difference in how we hold what we believe, how we handle differences, where we operate from within us. Do we operate in the human or do we operate in the animal? And the animal can be incited to do battle with anything on this plane. Republican, Democrat, Christian, Muslim. But they're not what matters. What matters is this. How we make sense of hatred is we see it as a breakdown in this. It's people that are going low, that are operating out of the subcortical animal side of themselves. It's underdeveloped. They're resisting progress. They're resisting change. Versus, as opposed to people who are beginning to see as new humans from the best of them, from their identity, from their values, from their sense of self. And they're able to, from there, tolerate differences, understand other people, empathize, love despite differences. That's what we do in deep space. Deep space is all about spreading this and exploring this and getting this in balance and under control in a way that helps us make peace with ourselves and peace with the world around us. Peace and love. I love you guys. I'll talk to you soon.